Charles Morton had always been a man of routine. Every morning at exactly 7:30, he would walk to his mailbox at the end of his gravel driveway, coffee mug in hand, to collect whatever correspondence the day might bring. At 62 years old, the retired postal worker found comfort in these small rituals that structured his quiet life in the countryside. Tuesday morning started like any other. The October air was crisp, painting his breath in small puffs as he made his way down the familiar path. The maple trees that lined his property had begun their autumn transformation, dropping golden leaves that crunched satisfyingly under his worn brown boots. Charles had lived in this same house for 37 years, watching the seasons change through the same kitchen window, walking the same path to the same mailbox thousands of times. As he approached the weathered blue mailbox, he noticed something unusual. The flag was raised, indicating outgoing mail, but Charles distinctly remembered not placing anything there the night before. His memory, despite his age, remained sharp from years of organizing and sorting mail for the postal service. He frowned, wondering if perhaps his neighbor's mail had been misdelivered again. Opening the mailbox, Charles found a single envelope inside. The paper felt different under his fingertips, heavier than modern stationery, with a texture that reminded him of the quality paper his grandmother used to write letters on decades ago. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly yellowed at the edges, as if it had been sitting somewhere for many years. What struck him first was the postmark. Charles squinted at the faded ink, adjusting his glasses to make sure he was reading correctly. The date read clearly, October 15th, 2075. That was impossible. Today was October 15th, 2025. The letter was postmarked exactly 50 years in the future. His hands began to shake slightly as he turned the envelope over. Written in elegant cursive handwriting across the front was his own name and address. Charles Morton, 1247 Maple Ridge Road. But it was the return address that made his heart skip a beat. In the same careful handwriting, in the upper left corner, was written, C. Morton, 1247 Maple Ridge Road. The signature in the corner, barely visible but unmistakably present, read, Charles Morton. Charles stood frozen at his mailbox for several minutes, staring at the impossible envelope in his trembling hands. Cars occasionally passed on the rural road, their drivers probably wondering why the old man was standing motionless by his mailbox, but Charles barely noticed them. His mind raced through logical explanations. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. There had been a mistake at the post office. Maybe he was finally losing his mind like his father had in his final years. But the handwriting was undeniably his own. Not similar to his handwriting, not a close approximation, but exactly his own distinctive style. Every curve of every letter matched the way he had written his name thousands of times throughout his life. Charles had spent decades examining handwriting in his postal career, learning to recognize forgeries and alterations. This was not a forgery. Walking slowly back to his house, Charles felt as if he were moving through a dream. The familiar surroundings seemed strange now, as if the mysterious letter had somehow shifted his entire reality. His small white farmhouse, with its green shutters and wraparound porch, looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes earlier, but everything felt different. Inside, Charles sat at his kitchen table, the letter placed carefully in front of him like evidence in a crime scene. His coffee had grown cold, but he barely noticed. Through the window, he could see his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, hanging laundry on her line, completely unaware that the natural order of time and space had apparently been violated in her neighborhood. Charles had always been a skeptical man. During his postal career, he had seen every kind of mail fraud and peculiar correspondence imaginable. He had delivered letters to people who had died years earlier, mail addressed to fictional characters, and packages that made no sense whatsoever. But this was different. This was personal, impossible, and terrifying. The envelope sat unopened before him. Part of him wanted to tear it up and pretend he had never found it. Another part of him was desperately curious about what message his future self might have sent back through time. If that was indeed what had happened, which seemed impossible, but was the only explanation that fit the evidence before him. Charles examined the postmark again under a magnifying glass he kept for reading fine print. The date was clear and unmistakable, October 15th, 2075. The postal cancellation marks looked authentic, bearing the familiar circular stamp pattern he knew from his years of service. Even more puzzling, the postmark bore the logo and markings of the United States Postal Service, but with subtle differences he had never seen before. The eagle symbol was slightly different, and there were additional numbers and codes he did not recognize. The stamp itself was unlike anything in his extensive knowledge of postal history. It featured a landscape that looked somewhat familiar yet strange, showing what appeared to be his own property, but with buildings and features he did not recognize. The trees were taller, there were structures in places where none currently existed, and the overall view suggested the photograph or artwork had been taken from an elevated position that did not currently exist near his home. As the morning progressed, Charles found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. He tried reading his newspaper, watching his usual morning television programs, and even attempted to work in his small garden behind the house. But every few minutes, his eyes would drift back to the kitchen table, where the mysterious envelope waited. By noon, Charles had convinced himself that he needed to open the letter. Whatever was inside could not possibly be more disturbing than the questions that were multiplying in his mind with each passing hour. He had considered calling someone, but who would believe such an impossible story? His sister lived 3 states away, and would probably think he was having some kind of mental health crisis. His few close friends were practical people who would assume he was the victim of a hoax. Charles made himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down at the table once more. With steady hands that surprised him given the circumstances, he carefully opened the envelope along its edge, trying not to damage what might be important evidence of something extraordinary. Inside was a single sheet of the same heavy paper, folded once. As Charles unfolded it, he immediately recognized his own handwriting again, but the writing looked somehow different, older perhaps, with slight tremors in some of the letter formations that suggested the writer had been elderly when the letter was composed. The letter was dated October 10th, 2075, just 5 days before the postmark date. It was addressed simply to Charles, and began in a way that made Charles feel as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. The letter read, "Dear Charles, I know this will seem impossible to believe, but I am writing to you from 50 years in your future. I am you, at 112 years old, and I have very little time left to share what you must know." Charles set the letter down and walked to his bathroom, where he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him appeared normal enough, though perhaps paler than usual. He was not dreaming. He was not hallucinating. The letter was real. The handwriting was unmistakably his own, and something impossible was happening. Returning to the kitchen table, Charles continued reading. "You are probably wondering how this letter has reached you. The answer involves discoveries that will not be made for another 20 years. Technologies that do not yet exist in your time. What matters now is not how this is possible, but what you must do with the information I am about to share with you." The letter went on to describe events that would supposedly happen in Charles's future. According to his older self, Charles would live far longer than he had ever expected. He would witness incredible changes in the world, technological advances that would seem like magic, and personal experiences that would transform his understanding of life itself. "In 3 weeks," the letter continued, "you will receive a phone call from a lawyer in Boston. He will tell you that a distant relative you have never heard of has left you a significant inheritance. You will be skeptical, as you should be, because this relative does not actually exist. The inheritance is real, but it comes from a source you cannot yet understand. Accept it. Charles frowned at this passage. He had no wealthy relatives, distant or otherwise. His family had always been working-class people who lived modest lives. The idea of receiving an inheritance from anyone seemed absurd, let alone from a relative who apparently did not exist. The letter provided specific details. The lawyer's name will be Jonathan Westbrook. He will call on November 3rd at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. The inheritance will amount to exactly $847,000. This money will allow you to make changes to your life that are essential for the events that must unfold. Reading further, Charles learned that he was supposed to use the inheritance money to make specific improvements to his property. According to the letter, he needed to have a basement excavated beneath his house, despite the fact that his house currently sat on a simple concrete slab foundation. The excavation would need to be completed by a particular contractor whose business card would supposedly arrive in his mail exactly 1 week after the lawyer's call. The basement must be built to exact specifications, the letter warned. The contractor, Marcus Delacroix, will know what to do if you show him this letter. The basement will serve a purpose you cannot yet understand, but it is absolutely essential that it be completed before the spring of 2026. Charles found himself getting annoyed with his supposed future self. The letter was full of mysterious instructions and vague warnings without adequate explanations. Why was a basement necessary? What purpose would it serve? How could a contractor know what to do based on a letter that claimed to be from the future? The next section of the letter addressed his skepticism directly. I know you are frustrated by the lack of details. I know you want explanations for everything I am telling you. The truth is that some knowledge is dangerous if received too early. There are people and organizations in your time who would prevent these events from occurring if they knew what was coming. For now, you must trust and act on faith. According to the letter, the changes to Charles's property were somehow connected to scientific research that would not begin for another 15 years. His property apparently sat on or near something significant that would be discovered by researchers in the 2040s. The basement would play a crucial role in protecting and preserving something important during a period of great upheaval that would occur in the 2050s. By the time you read this letter in 2075, the future Charles had written, the world will be very different from the one you know now. There will have been challenges and crises that will test humanity's ability to survive and thrive. But there will also be wonders and discoveries that will give you hope for the future of our species. The basement you build will help ensure that certain crucial information survives a period when such information will be under threat. The letter contained other specific instructions as well. Charles was told to begin learning about hydroponics and sustainable agriculture. He was instructed to start collecting and preserving seeds from heritage varieties of vegetables and fruits. Most puzzling of all, he was told to begin studying ancient languages, particularly Sanskrit and ancient Greek. You will think these skills are useless for a retired postal worker, the letter acknowledged, but they will become essential to your purpose. In 2031, you will meet a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez. She will need your help with translations that only someone with your particular combination of knowledge and experience will be able to provide. Begin preparing now. Charles had never shown any interest in ancient languages. He had barely passed high school Latin decades ago. The idea that he would somehow become proficient enough in Sanskrit and ancient Greek to assist a researcher seemed absurd. Yet the letter insisted that these skills would be crucial to his future role. As Charles continued reading, the tone of the letter became more urgent. There are others who know about the discoveries that will be made on your property. Some of these people have good intentions, but others do not. In the coming years, you may be approached by individuals claiming to represent various government agencies, private corporations, or research institutions. Be very careful about who you trust. The letter provided detailed descriptions of 3 specific individuals who would supposedly contact Charles over the next several years. Each description included physical appearance, mannerisms, and particular phrases they would use to try to gain his confidence. According to his future self, 2 of these individuals would be trustworthy allies, while the third would represent a dangerous threat to the work Charles would apparently be doing. When Dr. Sarah Chen contacts you in the summer of 2027, the letter instructed, you can trust her completely. She will approach you at the farmer's market in town, commenting on the unusual variety of tomatoes you will be growing by then. She will mention that her grandmother grew similar tomatoes in China before the war. This will be your signal that she is the person I have told you to expect. The description of the dangerous individual was more ominous. Dr. Marcus Thornfield will approach you in September of 2029. He will arrive at your door carrying a briefcase and wearing a gray suit with a small pin on the lapel shaped like a tree. He will claim to represent a historical preservation society interested in your property. Under no circumstances should you allow him inside your house or provide him with any information about the work you will be doing. He represents interests that would misuse what you are protecting. Charles found himself making notes as he read, despite his skepticism about the letter's authenticity. If these events actually occurred as described, he would want to remember the details. At the same time, he worried that he might be falling victim to an elaborate delusion or some kind of sophisticated fraud. The final section of the letter contained the most disturbing information yet. Charles, I must warn you that accepting the inheritance and following these instructions will change your life in ways you cannot imagine. You will live much longer than any human being should, and you will witness events that will challenge your understanding of reality itself. The work you will do is important, but it will also be isolating and sometimes frightening. If you choose not to follow these instructions, you will live out the remainder of your natural life peacefully and die sometime in your 80s. The choice is yours, but know that the fate of future generations may depend on your decision. The letter was signed simply Charles, with a date of October 10th, 2075. Below the signature was a small drawing that made Charles's blood run cold. It was a perfect sketch of his childhood home, down to the last detail of the front porch where he had spent countless summer evenings with his parents and sister. No one else could have drawn that house with such accuracy, because it had been demolished 40 years earlier when the interstate highway was built. Charles spent the rest of October in a state of constant tension, alternating between believing the letter was authentic and dismissing it as an elaborate hoax. He found himself checking his watch frequently as November 3rd approached, wondering if a lawyer named Jonathan Westbrook would actually call at 2:30 in the afternoon as predicted. He used the waiting time to research everything mentioned in the letter. Online searches for Jonathan Westbrook, Attorney Boston, yielded several results, but none seemed to match what he expected. He looked up information about hydroponics and ancient languages, feeling somewhat foolish but unable to resist following the letter's suggestions. Charles even drove to the local library to check out beginner books on Sanskrit and ancient Greek, ignoring the librarian's curious glances. The morning of November 3rd, Charles could barely eat breakfast. He paced around his house, cleaned things that were already clean, and checked his phone repeatedly to make sure it was working properly. At exactly 2:28 in the afternoon, he positioned himself next to the kitchen telephone and waited. At 2:31, the phone rang. "Mr. Charles Morton?" The voice was professional, with a slight Boston accent. "Yes, this is Charles. My name is Jonathan Westbrook. I'm an attorney with Westbrook, Hamilton and Associates in Boston. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late relative, Cornelius Morton. I believe you may be unfamiliar with this branch of your family." Charles's hands began shaking. Everything was happening exactly as the letter had predicted. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any relatives named Cornelius Morton," Charles managed to say. "That's not unusual, Mr. Morton. Cornelius was quite elderly and had been estranged from the family for many decades. However, our records clearly show that you are his closest living relative. He has left you a considerable inheritance, and we need to arrange for the transfer of these assets." The conversation proceeded almost word for word as described in the letter. Jonathan Westbrook was professional, patient with Charles's questions, and insisted that proper documentation would be provided to verify the legitimacy of the inheritance. The amount was exactly $847,000, as predicted. Within a week, Charles received a packet of legal documents that appeared completely authentic. Bank officials confirmed that the inheritance was real, and the money was transferred to Charles's account without any complications. He stared at his bank statement in disbelief, seeing more money than he had ever imagined possessing. True to the letter's prediction, a business card arrived in his mail exactly 1 week after the lawyer's call. Marcus Delacroix, Specialized Construction, was printed in simple black letters on heavy cardstock. Below the name was a phone number and the words, "Basement excavation and custom foundation work." When Charles called the number, Marcus Delacroix answered immediately, speaking with a slight French accent. "Mr. Morton," Marcus said before Charles could fully introduce himself, "I have been expecting your call. When would you like me to come look at your property? How did you know who was calling? Your name was given to me by someone who said you would need my services. I understand you have received some unusual instructions about excavation work." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. "Yes, I have a letter with some specifications." "Excellent. I will arrive tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Please have the letter ready to show me." When Marcus Delacroix arrived the next morning, he was exactly as Charles had somehow expected. A tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. He examined the letter carefully, nodding at certain passages as if they made perfect sense. "This will be a complex project," Marcus said after reading through the specifications. "The excavation must be done very precisely, and the materials called for here are not standard. It will cost approximately $200,000 to complete properly." $200,000. Charles was stunned by the amount. The specifications call for very particular types of concrete and steel reinforcement. There are also some unusual requirements for electrical and ventilation systems that suggest this space will serve a special purpose. I can complete the work as described, but it must be done exactly according to these plans. Charles spent several days considering whether to proceed. The logical part of his mind insisted that he was about to waste an enormous amount of money on a basement he did not need, based on instructions from a letter that could not possibly be authentic. But another part of him, a part that had been growing stronger since the inheritance arrived exactly as predicted, believed that something extraordinary was happening. He authorized the construction. The excavation took 3 months to complete. During that time, Charles began studying the ancient languages mentioned in the letter. To his surprise, he discovered that he had an unexpected aptitude for linguistic study. The Sanskrit and ancient Greek that had seemed impossibly difficult at first began to make sense as he dedicated several hours each day to learning. He also began experimenting with hydroponics in his spare bedroom, growing vegetables in nutrient solutions under artificial lights. His neighbors probably thought he had developed some eccentric hobbies, but Charles found the work strangely satisfying. The vegetables he grew were remarkably healthy and flavorful, better than anything he had been able to produce in his traditional outdoor garden. When the basement construction was complete in early March 2026, Charles was amazed by what had been created beneath his modest house. The space was much larger than he had expected, with multiple rooms, sophisticated ventilation and electrical systems, and storage areas lined with climate-controlled cabinets. Marcus had installed equipment that Charles did not recognize, including some kind of water purification system and what appeared to be a small computer server room. "What is all this for?" Charles asked as Marcus showed him around the completed space. "I do not know," Marcus replied honestly. I was given very specific instructions about what to build and where to install each component. Someone who understands the purpose of this facility designed it very carefully, but they did not explain their intentions to me. Before leaving, Marcus handed Charles another envelope. I was told to give this to you when the construction was finished. Inside was another letter in his own handwriting, dated March 15th, 2026. This letter was much shorter than the first. Charles, the foundation has been prepared. Now you must wait and continue your studies. Dr. Elena Vasquez will contact you in 2031, and Dr. Sarah Chen will find you in 2027. Everything is proceeding as it must. Trust in the process, even when it seems impossible. Your real work has not yet begun. Over the next several months, Charles settled into a new routine. He continued his language studies, expanded his hydroponic growing operation, and gradually filled the basement storage areas with preserved seeds and growing supplies. He felt like he was preparing for something momentous, though he still had no clear understanding of what that might be. In the summer of 2027, while selling vegetables at the local farmer's market, a middle-aged Asian woman approached his stand and examined his tomatoes with obvious expertise. "These are very unusual varieties," she said, picking up one of the large, dark red fruits he had grown using techniques he was still learning. "My grandmother grew tomatoes like these in China before the war. I haven't seen anything similar in decades." "Dr. Sarah Chen?" Charles asked, his heart beating faster. She smiled and extended her hand. "I see you've been expecting me. We have a great deal to discuss." That conversation marked the beginning of Charles's education about his true purpose. Dr. Chen was a geneticist and agricultural researcher who had been investigating the preservation of heritage plant varieties. According to her, the genetic diversity of food crops was disappearing at an alarming rate, and climate change would make the remaining varieties even more vulnerable in the coming decades. "Someone contacted me about your work," Dr. Chen explained as they sat in Charles's kitchen. "They told me you were developing important preservation techniques and had access to varieties that would be crucial for future food security. I was skeptical until I saw what you're growing." Over the following months, Dr. Chen taught Charles about genetic preservation, advanced growing techniques, and the complex challenges facing global agriculture. She helped him understand why the basement had been designed with such sophisticated storage and climate control systems. It was apparently intended to serve as a seed bank and research facility for preserving genetic material that would be essential for humanity's survival. "Who told you about my work?" Charles asked during one of their sessions. "Someone who claimed to represent a future agricultural preservation society," Dr. Chen replied. "The person contacted me through encrypted communications and provided detailed information about your location and the work you were doing. I thought it might be some kind of elaborate hoax until I came here and saw the results for myself." As 2029 approached, Charles found himself thinking often about the warning in the original letter regarding Dr. Marcus Thornfield. In September, exactly as predicted, a man in a gray suit arrived at Charles's door carrying a briefcase. He wore a small pin on his lapel shaped like a tree. "Mr. Morton? My name is Dr. Marcus Thornfield. I represent the Historical Preservation Society of New England. We understand that your property may be of significant historical and scientific interest." Charles looked at the man through his screen door, remembering the letter's specific warning about not allowing him inside. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in any historical surveys of my property. Mr. Morton, I think you may be misunderstanding the importance of what we're offering. Our organization has resources that could be very beneficial to the work you're doing here. We know about your agricultural research and your basement facility." The fact that this stranger knew about his basement confirmed Charles's worst fears about the man's intentions. "I'm not interested," Charles repeated firmly. "Please leave my property." Dr. Thornfield's friendly demeanor faded slightly. "Mr. Morton, I think you should reconsider. There are larger forces at work here than you realize. It would be wise to cooperate with organizations that can protect your interests. Goodbye, Dr. Thornfield. Charles closed the door and watched through the window as the man returned to his car. Before driving away, Thornfield made a phone call and appeared to be taking photographs of Charles's house. Charles felt a deep unease about the encounter and wondered what other challenges his future self had not warned him about. In 2031, Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived exactly as predicted. She was a historian and linguist who specialized in ancient texts related to agriculture and environmental management. Her visit marked the beginning of Charles's most important work, translating ancient documents that contained forgotten knowledge about sustainable farming and environmental preservation. The texts I need help with are written in Sanskrit and ancient Greek, Dr. Vasquez explained. They contain agricultural techniques that were developed thousands of years ago but have been lost to modern science. Someone told me you had the linguistic skills and practical experience needed to make these translations meaningful. Working with Dr. Vasquez, Charles discovered that his years of study had prepared him for exactly this task. The ancient texts described farming methods that were perfectly suited for the climate challenges the world would face in the coming decades. Combined with modern technology and the genetic material Charles had been preserving, these techniques could provide solutions to food security problems that scientists were just beginning to understand. As Charles approached his 70th birthday in 2033, he realized that the mysterious letter had transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. He was healthier and more engaged with the world than he had been in decades. His work with Drs. B. Chen and Vasquez had connected him to a network of researchers and scientists who were working to prepare for humanity's future challenges. The basement beneath his house had become a crucial resource in this effort, housing genetic material and research data that would be essential for food production in a changing world. Charles still did not fully understand how he had received letters from his future self, but he had stopped questioning the impossibility of it all. What mattered now was the work itself and the growing certainty that every instruction in those letters had led him exactly where he needed to be. As he looked ahead to the years remaining in his life, Charles felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. He was no longer just a retired postal worker living quietly in the countryside. He had become a guardian of humanity's future, and that responsibility filled him with both hope and determination for whatever challenges lay ahead.